Welcome back to another video, guys. So few people understand the way the forestry industry works. I felt it was good to take the time to have a full video breaking down the common practices of the industry, some of the common pitfalls that people run into, and just sort of a total approach to the forestry industry and what you need to know as a landowner. So first off, all the things in this video are going to only apply to the Midwest. That is where I'm located. I am in Northeast Ohio. I service most of Ohio, parts of the surrounding states. But the common practices for forestry are going to vary quite a bit depending on your region. So you're looking out west or down south, or even the far east might be different than what the common practice is here in the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, all these different states. And so understand that what I'm talking about here may be applicable to you, it may not be. So just take that with a grain of salt. So to start off, I think it's good to understand what loggers or timber buyers are looking for. I have a lot of calls where guys will have me come look at their property and they have no idea what they have, and that's fine. That's part of our job, is to come out and see what you have. But understanding just because you have trees does not necessarily mean there's timber value there. You might have a lot of really small trees or brush trees and not have any actual mature hardwoods that are ready to be harvested and are actually valuable. A few of the main ones are going to be your white oak, your walnut, red oak, poplar, and your maple. Those are just hickory. Those are just a few of the main species, that most buyers are looking for here in the Midwest. Walnut and white oak being the two most valuable at this time. So do your research, go online. There's plenty of resources out there to figure out what trees are on your property. Learn the species, take the time to figure out what you have. And then after that, it comes down to, diameter. A lot of people say, hey, I got a 100-foot tall walnut tree. Well, that doesn't actually tell me that much. Just because a tree is tall does not necessarily mean it's valuable. More often than not, buyers are looking at diameter. And diameter indicates how mature the tree is for the most part. So the more diameter you have, the more valuable a tree. In most scenarios where you're looking to do a selective harvest, buyers are looking for 16 to 18 inches chest high and larger. When I do a selective harvest, I like to see a lot of trees in that 20 to 30 inch range, and then then you can do a nice selective harvest, and it gives you a lot of options, and that's when your woods is truly ready. Now that's not saying that there are not properties that guys will buy the timber a lot smaller than that. They will, and depending on your goals, that may make sense for you. But do not, if you're looking to strictly manage it for timber value over the long term, do not simply harvest your trees just because somebody's willing to buy them. That is not a good indication that they are actually mature. So let's say you've established that you do have timber value on your property, and you want to look at getting a buyer out. So what are the next steps? So I'm going to break down, there's several different types of buyers within the logging industry. You have one is your mills, and these are more so the end consumers of the material. They will actually take the log. Most of these operations, they'll have buyers, they'll have loggers that do the work for them to harvest the trees, and then they have the mill to actually process the lumber, and then they will sell that out to be either made into furniture or flooring or whatever they end up doing with it. And then you have the loggers, and these are guys, most loggers would be subcontracted by the mills to do the work. But there are loggers that will, in some areas, buy timber themselves. And so in this scenario, oftentimes what they'll do, they'll go to a landowner, they'll go in, mark the timber, they'll cut the timber down, drag it out, and then they will get multiple guys in to bid on that timber and then give you a percentage of that. Most common is 50-50 or a 60-40 split, 60-40, 60 going to you, 40 to the logger. And this is pretty common practice in a lot of areas, but I do feel there's a better way of doing that. I just recently spoke with a landowner that had a good chunk of ground out in Missouri, and they got a pretty reputable company out. and you know, they went in and did the whole process, cut the trees down. Ended up, the trees were not very good quality after they were harvested and brought down. They had a lot of issues, and ended up you know, walking away with far less money than what he was thinking he was going to get. And a way to remedy this is to sell timber standing beforehand, not based off a percentage split. Not saying that a percentage split is bad, and you know, in some areas that may be all that's available to you, but I have seen that if you do sell timber standing and you get multiple buyers out, most of the time you're going to get better prices and not run that risk of the trees not cutting well and you being shortchanged. So next we have consultants, and there's going to be several different type of consultants out there. Two main categories, I would say. One consultant type works for you, and another brand themselves as a consultant but really are just wholesalers. So you want to be very wary of these guys. Not saying that they're all, you know, bad and that you shouldn't, you know, necessarily work with these guys, but a wholesaler is simply coming out, they are getting the timber under contract, and most times these guys will act as though they themselves are the buyer, but they are not being clear about what they are getting paid. So what they'll do, they'll come out, get the timber under contract, and then simply go find a buyer that will pay more for that contract, essentially flipping the contract, doing very little work. Most of the time they're not involved in the back end managing the project throughout its completeness, and you have no control over what buyer is ending up with this and who's actually doing your work. The next type is an actual consulting forester, where they're going to come out, mark the timber, and market it on your behalf. And you are paying these guys directly out of the income off the timber sale. This is never a thing of, you know, you're not being clear of what these guys are getting paid. And so that's what I do myself. I will come out to your property, you know, we'll assess what your goals are for the project. And you know, I kind of specialize in more so the hunting space, and having guys that have hunting properties and setting those up and harvesting them correctly for hunting. But we'll go in and mark the timber accordingly. You know, we'll have a bid sheet showing you exactly how many trees are going to be harvested, the board feet, the different species, a complete breakdown that you're able to see exactly which trees are being harvested, and then getting a list of reputable buyers out and actually bidding on those trees. And this gives you true market value of what that timber is worth. When you get half a dozen to a dozen bids on a piece of timber, that is going to be the current market value. So at that point, then you go with the high bidder, and then the consultant will manage the entire project for you throughout the entirety of it. So to make sure that the buyer is abiding by the contract, that they are doing the work according to the way it's supposed to be done, to making sure the reclamation is done correctly, and they're checking in on this crew weekly or every other week, making sure the work is done the way it's supposed to be done. And there's a lot of studies out there done by OSU and other universities showing that working with a consulting forester will end up, you know, you're going to end up getting more money for your timber while taking fewer trees doing it this way. So I wanted to take the time yet to touch on a very important aspect of this entire process, and that is the timber contract. I mentioned earlier that, you know, something that some of these wholesalers will do is they'll simply get the contract, you know, signed, and then they'll flip that contract to another buyer. And while that itself is maybe not that big a deal, it's more, you don't have the control then of who's actually doing the work on your project, and that's where you get a lot of problems. Most issues that people have with loggers or in this entire industry could be avoided by a good contract. Now, very few buyers won't use a contract, but they often have the contract worded and you know, basically in their favor. You are kind of, when you sign that contract, you just don't have a lot of options. So having a good contract is extremely important. All of my contracts, you know, I make sure that they can't be assigned to other buyers. You know, I make sure there's things in place that force the buyer to make sure the reclamation is done correctly, making sure, you know, there's nothing that they can really get around other than doing it by the contract and doing it according to the way, you know, that was originally intended. And this will save you a lot of headaches by having a good timber contract in place before the project starts. I hope this video was valuable to you guys. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.